Hey fam, welcome back in. Thank you for joining us. We are into the double-digit weeks of the NFL season. Not a lot of time to waste. Let's go ahead and dive right into it. We're going to give you our top 24 running back rankings for week 10. Let's kick it off with our RB1s. They are as follows. We have Christian McCaffrey at RB1, followed by Austin Eckler, Brees Hall, Alvin Kamara, Travis Etienne, Tony Pollard, JT, Josh Jacobs, Joe Mixon, Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, and Aaron Jones rounding out our top 12 rankings for week 10. Kev, what should the folks know about these RB1s?
Yeah, I don't have a lot to talk about when it comes to the RB1s this week. I mean, I feel like most of these guys are kind of straightforward, but there is a few players that I just want to hit on that, as their roles have been changing. So, first off, it's Brees Hall. It's a great matchup this week, but he continues to handle the bulk of the work. Over the past four games, Brees Hall ranks 10th in team rush attempts, 8th in target share, and his 17.2 PPR points ranks 8th over that span. On the season, he also ranks first in explosive runs of 15 plus yards and is second in yards after contact per attempt. Now, this week they take on a Raiders defense that has allowed the fourth most PPR points on the season, but over the last 4 weeks, they have allowed the third most rushing yards per game at a 4.1 yards per clip and have the third lowest stuff rate allowed. So this is a very, very good matchup for Brees Hall. Next up, let's talk about Tony Pollard. And I get it. He might be one of the biggest busts through the first 9 weeks of the season. However, things are starting to look up for Tony Pollard because the Cowboys have the fifth easiest remaining schedule rest of season. And things should start to get a bit easier as soon as this weekend against the Giants. Pollard has the fourth highest expected fantasy points among all running backs as well, which basically means the amount of volume he sees, he should be averaging 17.2 PPR points per game. Now, the Giants have allowed the third most rushing yards, touchdowns, and PPR points to the position. So Tony Pollard is in a very good spot this week. And so I do like him quite a bit. I know he's been frustrating, but this should be a matchup as well as next week against the Carolina Panthers, where he should really take off and really start to be more of the guy that we hoped that he would be. Lastly, let's talk about Aaron Jones versus the Steelers. Matt LaFleur said last week that it was time to unleash Aaron Jones. While I wouldn't call it quite unleashing, he did handle a much larger workload. He played 57% of the snaps, 55% of the rush attempts with a 21% target share. Now, the Steelers have really struggled to stop the run this year. They've allowed a 4.49 yards per carry, which is the seventh highest rate in the league. They've also allowed the 14th highest explosive run rate allowed, and they've also 8th in missed tackles forced per attempt, 4th in yards after contact per attempt, and 8th most PPR points. So this is a very good matchup for Aaron Jones. I do like Aaron Jones quite a bit here. So,
Yeah, it's definitely the first time I've had Aaron Jones ranked as a RB1 this season. I think he's in a really nice spot. We don't have to go into the whole Arthur Smith thing. I know the entire fantasy community is just absolutely burying him over the past couple of weeks. I just want to say that it makes me really sad that in this spot against Arizona, we can't really rank him any higher than what we have him. Kev, you have him at 8. I have him at 12. And like even that feels like I feel uneasy about it because of Arthur Smith. But let's go ahead and dive into the RB2s for this week. And to kick it off with Derrick Henry at RB13, followed by Javonte Williams, Kenneth Walker, Ramondre Stevenson, Rashad White, David Montgomery, James Cook, Jameer Gibbs, Alexander Madison, Najee Harris, Brian Robinson, and Jalen Warren at RB24. Kev, RB2s, what do we need to know?
yeah, I mean, I think Javante's back, baby. I think he's back. So I'm really excited about Javante moving forward. This is kind of what we talked about, before the season started, that he was probably going to start off a little slow and then they would start to ramp him up. Well, they've ramped him up. Over his last 4 games, he ranks third in yards after contact per attempt, sixth in missed tackles forced per attempt, and first at explosive run rate. We also saw him start to take over the backfield before their bye week, where he handled 66% of the snaps, 82% of the rush attempts, and a 17% target share. Now, normally on most seasons, you wouldn't want to target the Buffalo Bills with the running back, but that is different. They've allowed the 11th most PPR points, 10th most rushing yards, and the 4.86 yards per carry is the third highest rate in the league. They've also allowed the most yards after contact per attempt. So, and this is very much a matchup you can target with Javonte Williams. And if you haven't already done so, and if you've been holding all year, congratulations, because I think he's about to go off in the second half of the season. Next up, let's talk about Kenneth Walker. Now, this is a troubling situation. Originally, I kind of thought he would be, I would have him as an RB1, but I just can't get him there because of the fact of what's going on right now with Zach Charbonnet. His usage has now dropped over the last 2 weeks. He played less than 50% of the snaps over that span, while Charbonnet has played a plus 50% snaps over that span as well. That being said, Walker still handled 62% of the rush attempts. Last week, only 31% to Charbonnet. Now, I still expect Walker to lead the backfield in touches during positive rushing scripts. Walker has been 16th in yards after contact per attempt, 7th in explosive run rate, and 9th in missed tackles forced. It is a decent matchup against the Commanders here, as they are a middle of the road defense against the running backs this season, with a 4.1 yards per carry and a 42% stuff rank, which both rank 16th. They've also allowed the 15th most PPR points to running backs. The only problem that really worries me here is mainly the fact Charbonnet has really eaten into this workload. And if they seem to fall behind, they seem to tend to go to Charbonnet, who has much better passing game. And just Kenneth Walker just hasn't really gotten there in that department. So that is what's really worrying me with him. He only has a 6% target share on the season. And so if they do fall behind, which Washington's passing offense has been able to get there, then that's what worries me a little bit about Kenneth Walker. I'm still starting him this week, but I'm just not as high of expectation as I originally thought I would. Ramondre Stevenson gets a matchup this week against Indianapolis. He's coming off his best game of the season where he dropped 23 PPR points. His numbers have stabilized and is handling 62% of the snaps, 53% of the rush attempts, 61% of the routes with a 15% target share. And over the last 4 weeks, he's really started to come on as he ranks second in yards after contact per attempt and fifth in explosive run rate. So things are starting to look up for Ramondre Stevenson. And this week, they get a great matchup against the Indianapolis Colts, who have allowed 125.6 rushing yards per game, which is ninth highest in the league. And they've also allowed the fifth most PPR points as well. So really solid matchup here for Ramondre Stevenson. Now, the Lions running backs, David Montgomery does sound like he is going to play this week. But I do think this is a very good matchup here for Jahmyr Gibbs, and I don't think this is as good of a matchup here for David Montgomery. Campbell did speak yesterday, and he said that Gibbs has earned a larger role once Monty returns, and I would expect him to be something closer to 50-50 split here. Now, the Chargers have been really good against running backs this year. They have allowed the fourth fewest rushing yards per game and a 3.27 yards per carry, which ranks fourth fewest in the league. They've allowed the third lowest explosive run rate and as well as 12th lowest in terms of yards after contact per attempt. But where they have gotten beat is through the air, as they've allowed the second most receiving yards on the season. That's where Jahmyr Gibbs comes in. I think he plays a much bigger role in the passing game. And so that is why I like Jahmyr Gibbs more in PPR formats than I do David Montgomery. I think you can still play David Montgomery coming back from this injury, but I do not have as high as expectations, I think, as a lot of people are going to, where you're going to see him in the race. People probably got Monty higher than Jahmyr Gibbs, and I think that's a mistake this week. So next up, let's talk about Rachaad White versus the Titans. Now, early in the season, I would have said don't play Rachaad White against the Titans, but things have changed. And Rachaad White is handling a very healthy 80% of the snaps, 68% of the rush attempts with a 14% target share. And since week 6, he ranks 12th in explosive run rate, 34th in yards after contact per attempt, and 19th in yards per route run. It's not hard to like White as a volume-based RB2 this week going up against the Titans defense that has really started to struggle, allowing the third most rushing yards per game and with a 4.8 yards per carry, which is the fifth highest rate over that span. So the Titans defense is no longer a defense that we should be afraid to attack with running backs. And so Rachaad White, especially as his involvement in the passing game, he hasn't been super efficient. So I know it's a little scary, but I do think this is a better matchup than what most people will talk about this week. Next up, let's talk about Alexander Mattison versus Saints. With Cam Akers heading to IR with a torn Achilles, Mattison once again has a much more secure role within this offense. However, his ineffectiveness should be mentioned. He ranks 41st, 2.7 yards per carry among 50 qualifying running backs, and he's also 36th in explosive run rate, 18th in missed tackles forced per attempt, and 35th in yards after contact per attempt on the season. Now, we typically also think of the Saints as another team that we want to avoid with running backs. However, the Saints have allowed the fourth most rushing yards per game and nearly 5.0 yards per carry over their last 4 weeks. And they have also allowed the fourth highest yards after contact per attempt and the 13th highest missed tackle force rate over that span as well. So this is not a matchup that we should really be afraid of with Alexander Mattison. However, Alexander Mattison has been completely ineffective and not really all that efficient as a runner. But with Cam Akers out, I do expect he's going to go back to seeing a very healthy workload. And so that being said, I think he's a volume-based low-end RB2 this week. Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. Maybe Najee Harris is back. I don't know. Last week, we saw a small shift back towards Najee Harris as he played 60% of the snaps, handled 53% of the rush attempts, and 50% of the routes with an 11% target share. And over the past 3 weeks, he has 2 top 12 finishes and a top 20 finish in there as well. He also ranks 23rd in yards after contact per attempt, 29th in missed tackle force, and 28th in explosive run rate as well. While now Jalen Warren is doing his best Tony Pollard from 2022, he is ranking 9th in explosive run rate, 11th in missed tackles forced per attempt, and 15th in yards after contact per attempt. And this is a great matchup against the Packers, who have allowed the 9th most fantasy points to running back. So I think both of them are very viable. I think you can view both of them as kind of low-end RB2s this week. and very good spot. And now, lastly, originally I had Deontay Foreman on here, but we're starting to sound like Khalil Herbert could actually return this week. He has logged full practice participants all week so far, which is a positive. Play on Thursday night. We know this is a terrific matchup. And if he were to play, then he completely bumps Deontay Foreman out as a RB2 this week for me. And so I have actually lowered Deontay Foreman out. I've dropped him all the way down in the 50s, and I moved Khalil Herbert back up. If Herbert does not play and they decide to hold him out, this is a really good spot because Deontay Foreman last week handled 74% of the rush attempts, and the game script will definitely be there for him. Now, he's not utilized at all in the passing game, 0% target share last week, but the matchup is 100% there as the Panthers have allowed the second most fantasy points to running backs in the season. And over the last 4 weeks, the trend has continued as it allowed the ninth most rushing yards, the third most yards after contact per attempt. And like I said, this is largely depends on if Khalil Herbert plays.
Yeah, just want to bring up two guys outside of that really quickly. One, Jerome Ford, we have him at 26, so he's just outside of our top 24 running backs. You don't feel great about him in this matchup against Baltimore, but after it looked like we were going to be missing Jerome Ford for a couple of weeks, he kind of came back and took over this backfield this past week. Had 25 opportunities for Cleveland. So if you have to start him as like a volume based type of flex play RB2, you can. And then Tyler Algier, the Cardinals are allowing the third most fantasy points per game to the position. And Tyler Algier has 10 carries inside of the 10 to Bijan Robinson's 2. So assuming that they get close to the goal line, it's going to be Tyler Algier or maybe Jonnu Smith. Who knows? Who knows what Arthur Smith is going to do there? But if you have to start somebody like Tyler Algier, depending on your RB situation, you can feel like okay about it because he does seem like the preferred goal line and red zone back. So
Yeah, I think a couple other names you can talk about is Brian Robinson. I think some people may wonder why he's not, at least for me, inside my top 24. And that's mainly because Brian Robinson, he's really become basically situational, right? And basically, if they have a lead, then they'll utilize him a lot more. If not, he gets completely game scripted out. And it's been Antonio Gibson who's actually started to trend up. So in PPR formats, I really do like Antonio Gibson this week as that RB3 option. This is a good matchup against Seattle. Seattle does struggle against opposing running backs on the season. And so I do think both of these guys are in play. And really, Brian Robinson, you need him to find the end zone, where Antonio Gibson, I think, can get there just off pass volume because he really is the preferred option in the passing game. And if we continue to see him eat a little bit more into the rush attempts, then all of a sudden I think Antonio Gibson leapfrogs Brian Robinson as the lead back here and the guy that you look to own. But we'll see if that happens. But for right now, I think both these guys are viable RB3s. Zach Charbonnet I already talked about. He's definitely, I think, can play this week. A very good matchup for them as well. You already mentioned Tyler Algier. And then I want to mention something about Dameon Pierce that's kind of interesting under the hood that I did not expect to find when I was kind of looking into everything this week. Dameon Pierce, over his last 4 games he's played, is second in missed tackles forced per attempt, 13th in yards after contact per attempt, and 10th in explosive run rate are the last 4 games. So we might start to see him trend up. We'll see if he plays this week. I'm not saying you should run out and plug him into your lineup and he's going to go off this week. But I think there's some positive stuff here with Dameon Pierce under the hood. And so I'm not sure if I feel great about starting him. I think if you had to play him, I think you could if he gets back this week because let's face it, Devin Singletary has done absolutely nothing with the opportunity, but it's not a great matchup against Cincinnati. But I did want to mention that there's some stuff here under the hood here that makes Dameon Pierce that maybe once he gets back from this injury, that maybe he ends up kind of being the guy we were looking for because he was starting to become a lot more efficient with his touches prior to the injury. So did want to mention that as well. So I think those are all the guys you really look at in terms of some of the other options here. Gus Edwards, I think people wonder, especially as well as he's playing. Gus Edwards does get a terrible matchup against Cleveland. Cleveland's been excellent against opposing running backs. Chuba Hubbard is another guy that I think a lot of people are going to wonder why we don't have as an RB2 this week. And I'm going to say this, and people are going to look at the Bears and say, "Oh my God, this is a great matchup against the Bears." I'm going to stop you right there, player. And it is not a good matchup whatsoever. The Bears have been excellent against opposing running backs this year, as far as being on the ground. Right, the Bears have allowed the fourth fewest rushing yards per game, and they are first in stuff rank on the season. And so this team is actually very, very good against opposing running backs. And so I do not love Chuba Hubbard at all. I think he could get there possibly through the air because they have struggled a little more against pass catching running backs. But in terms of just pure running backs with running on the ground, this is not a matchup that you want to go out here and try to target. It is against Chicago Bears because they have quietly been excellent against opposing running backs this year. So I did want to point that out because I think a lot of people are going to be pushing Chuba Hubbard and saying how great of a matchup it is for him. It's not. Don't listen. So Anyways, that being said, I'm sure he'll go off and score 30 fantasy points or something like and just shove it down my throat, but that's the way it works. But anyways, that being said, hit that like and subscribe button for future content. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.